All right, let's dive into one of the biggest shakeups in Western history, the Protestant Reformation. I mean, this is a story that has everything: faith, power, brand new technology, and it was all kicked off by just one guy.
So, that really brings us to the central question, doesn't it? How on earth did one monk, armed with just a hammer and access to a printing press, manage to bring a whole empire to its knees? It sounds impossible. Well, let's get into it.
Okay, so to really get what happened, we have to set the scene. You know, Martin Luther didn't just show up out of nowhere. The world he lived in was basically a tinderbox just waiting for a spark.
We're talking about the 1500s here, right in the middle of the Renaissance. And that means people's mindsets were already starting to shift. There was this new focus on human stuff, on this world, on achievement, not just on spiritual matters. So the ground was already pretty fertile for some new ways of thinking.
And a lot of that new thinking was aimed directly at the Catholic Church. People were really starting to get fed up. You had popes who seemed way more interested in living lavish lifestyles and playing politics than, being spiritual leaders. A lot of local priests, they couldn't even read. And on top of all that, everyday folks were tired of sending their hard-earned money and taxes all the way to Rome. The frustration was definitely building.
Now, a huge part of that frustration, maybe the final straw for a lot of people, was this thing called an indulgence. So, what was it? Basically, it was a piece of paper from the church that promised to get you or your loved ones out of punishment for sins. It was kind of like a get-out-of-purgatory free card. And the catch? You usually had to pay for it.
And here's what that looked like in practice. This is pretty much a 16th century ad for indulgences. I mean, look at it. It's literally promising a direct path to heaven for a price. Salvation wasn't about faith anymore. It was something you could buy off a shelf. You can imagine why for a lot of people this just felt wrong. It was a step too far.
So, with all this bubbling discontent, the stage was perfectly set. And right on cue, enter our main character, the monk with the hammer.
So this is the man, Martin Luther. And what's key to understand is that he wasn't some outsider trying to burn the whole system down. Not at all. He was a very devout German monk, a theology professor in Wittenberg. He was a total insider who was just deeply, deeply troubled by what he saw happening inside his own church. And then came the moment. In 1517, he walks up to the church door in Wittenberg and nails up a document. This was his 95 Theses, basically a list of 95 arguments explaining why selling indulgences was wrong. Now, you have to realize, his goal here wasn't to start a revolution. He was a professor. He just wanted to spark a debate among fellow academics.
But a quiet, scholarly debate is not what he got. Not even close. What he got instead was a firestorm. He had just kicked off what you might call an accidental revolution.
So, why did this happen? How did a list nailed to a door explode like this? Well, it was the perfect storm. You had a revolutionary idea meeting a revolutionary technology, the printing press. Someone took Luther's theses off that church door, printed copies, and boom, they spread all over Germany. It was the 16th century version of going viral.
And the ideas themselves? They were absolutely radical for the time. He was essentially challenging the church's authority on three core beliefs. First, he argued people are saved through faith alone. You couldn't buy your way into heaven. Second, the Bible was the ultimate authority, not the Pope or church traditions. And third, and this was a big one, everybody should be able to read and interpret the Bible for themselves.
Now, you can probably guess that this was seen as a direct attack on the entire power structure of Europe. And the response from the top was, it was swift, it was harsh, and it would end up splitting a continent right down the middle. Okay, let's just walk through how quickly this escalated. First, Pope Leo X excommunicated him, but Luther refused to back down. So then the Holy Roman Emperor himself, Charles V, steps in and declares Luther an outlaw. That meant anyone, anywhere could kill him without punishment. And of course, they ordered all of his books to be burned. They were trying to completely erase him. But it was just too late for that. Luther had already gained some very powerful friends, especially among the German princes. So when the princes who were loyal to the Pope tried to shut down Luther's teachings for good, his supporters stood up and formally protested the decision. And that's it. That's where the name comes from. They became known as the Protestants.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, right? The word Protestant started out as a political label for the people who were protesting the emperor's command. It was only over time that the meaning broadened to what we think of today, basically any Western Christian who isn't part of the Catholic Church.
So, After all the dust settled, what was the end result? What's the lasting legacy of this one monk's protest?
I think this chart here shows it better than I can say it. The Reformation basically created a permanent crack right down the middle of Western Christianity. Before all this, you had one massive, unified institution, the Catholic Church. Afterwards, you get this explosion of new denominations. That religious unity that defined Europe for 1,000 years, it was gone. Forever.
So why does any of this matter to us today? I mean, it's a 500-year-old religious fight, right? Well, its impact goes way beyond religion. Think about it. When Luther challenged the absolute authority of the Pope and said that individuals could figure out the truth for themselves, well, that helped plant the seeds for some of our most basic modern ideas: individual freedom, the importance of your own conscience, and yeah, the right to question authority.
And that leaves us with a really interesting thought to chew on. This whole thing started as a call to reform the system, not destroy it, but it ended as a full-blown revolution that totally reshaped the world. So the question is, at what point does a call for reform cross the line and become a revolution? Something to think about.